Right now, somewhere in your city, a baby is screaming and a parent is bouncing them in a dark room at 3 a.m., completely out of ideas. This has been happening for exactly the same reason for 300,000 years. Most people assume ancient parents just had no choice but to let babies cry it out. That's not quite right. And the real answer explains something strange about why modern babies cry so much more than they used to. Let's start with the problem itself. Human babies are, biologically speaking, broken. Every other primate is born clinging. A baby chimpanzee can grip its mother's fur within hours of birth. A human baby can't even hold up its own head. Scientists call this altriciality, and the reason is brutal. Our ancestors evolved to walk upright, which narrowed the pelvis. At the same time, our brains kept getting bigger, so evolution made a trade. Human babies are born early, essentially 3 months premature compared to other apes, so the head can still fit through the birth canal. This means for the first months of life, a human infant cannot do anything for itself. It cannot cling. It cannot regulate its own temperature. It cannot even calm its own nervous system. And when something is wrong, it has exactly one tool. It screams. Now here's where it gets interesting. In 1986, a pediatrician named Urs Hunziker and a researcher named Ronald Barr ran an experiment at McGill University that changed how scientists understood crying. They took a group of mothers and told half of them to carry their babies at least 3 extra hours a day, even when the baby wasn't crying. Just carry them. Constant contact. The other half raised their babies normally. By 6 weeks, the babies who were carried more cried 43% less overall, and their crying at the worst time of day, the evening, dropped by nearly half. The conclusion was almost embarrassingly simple. Babies weren't crying because something was wrong. They were crying because they were alone. This is where ancient parenting starts to make sense. In the 1970s, a writer named Jean Liedloff spent 2 years living with the Yaquana people, a small tribe in the Venezuelan rainforest almost untouched by the outside world. What she saw broke every assumption she'd brought with her. Yaquana babies were in physical contact with an adult almost 24 hours a day, carried on the hip during the day, sleeping against a parent's body at night, not in a crib, not in another room, never alone. And the babies barely cried, not because they were being ignored into silence, because they never had a reason to scream for contact in the first place. The contact was already there. Compare that to modern Western infants who spend hours a day in cribs, car seats, and strollers, physically separated from any adult body. Researchers who've studied crying rates across cultures have found that infants in societies with near constant carrying cry significantly less, and for shorter durations, than infants raised with the kind of independent sleeping separate room setup common in industrialized countries. The baby's biology never changed. The environment around it did. So carrying was one tool, but it wasn't the only one. And this next part is where things get almost eerie. For decades, parents everywhere on Earth, in cultures that never had any contact with each other, independently discovered the exact same trick: shushing, rocking, a rhythmic, repetitive sound played close to the baby's ear at a volume louder than you'd expect. Turns out, there's a reason that specific sound works, and it has nothing to do with soothing. Inside the womb, a fetus is never in silence. Researchers who've placed microphones inside a pregnant uterus have recorded sound levels close to that of a vacuum cleaner, a constant dense whoosh of blood rushing through the placenta, layered with the mother's heartbeat and digestive sounds. It's loud, it's rhythmic, and it never stops for 9 straight months. When a baby is born into total silence, its nervous system doesn't experience that as peaceful. It experiences it as a void, as if the world it knew has vanished. Shushing sound, especially white noise close to the volume of the womb, essentially tricks the infant's brain into thinking nothing has changed. It's not calming the baby down. It's convincing the baby it's still inside. Then there's motion, rocking, swaying, walking with a baby against your chest. These aren't just distraction techniques. They stimulate something called the vestibular system, the part of the inner ear that tracks balance and movement. For 9 months, a fetus is in constant gentle motion, rocked by every step its mother takes. The moment that motion stops, the baby's nervous system registers it almost like a system failure. This is why cultures across history built devices specifically to keep that motion going without exhausting the parent. Cradle boards, used by many indigenous peoples across North America, kept infants upright, snug, and gently swaying against a caregiver's back for hours during work or travel. Hammocks, used across parts of South America and Southeast Asia, provided constant low-effort rocking through the night. None of these cultures shared this knowledge with each other. They arrived at nearly identical solutions, independently, because the baby's nervous system is asking for the exact same thing everywhere on Earth. And then there's the one you'd expect least: singing. In 2018, a researcher named Samuel Mayer at Harvard ran a study playing songs, lullabies, dance tunes, healing songs to listeners across more than 60 societies, many of whom had never heard Western music at all. Without knowing anything about the song's origin or language, listeners could correctly guess which songs were lullabies almost every single time. The melody itself carries the information. Slower tempo, descending pitch, simple, repetitive phrasing. It turns out lullabies aren't a cultural invention passed down through storytelling. They may be closer to a universal signal embedded in how the human voice and human hearing evolved together, a sound shape that tells an infant's nervous system specifically, "You are safe now." Swaddling tells a similar story. Archaeologists have found tightly bound infant remains in ancient Rome, in ancient Egypt, and across medieval Europe, wrapped so snugly the arms couldn't move. For a long time, historians assumed this was purely practical, keeping a baby warm or keeping limbs straight. But the deeper reason may be simpler. Swaddling recreates the tight, contained pressure of the womb in its final months, when there was barely room to move at all. Loosen that pressure suddenly, and a newborn's arms will often fling outward in what's called the startle reflex, jolting itself awake, crying from the shock of its own limbs moving freely for what feels, to its nervous system, like the first time. There's one more piece most parents have heard of but don't fully understand, and it explains why none of this always works. Ronald Barr, the same researcher from the carrying study, later coined a term for a specific kind of crying that peaks around 6 weeks and resists every soothing technique on this list. He called it purple crying, describing crying that's unexpected, comes in long bouts, resists self-soothing, and often happens in the evening for no clear reason. For decades, parents were told this meant something was wrong. Barr's research suggested otherwise, that this window appears across every culture ever studied, including the Yaquana, including societies with constant carrying and constant contact. It happens anyway. Part of infant crying isn't a signal that can be answered at all. It's a stage the nervous system has to move through. Ancient parents didn't have a name for it, but they understood it instinctively. They didn't treat it as a failure. They kept the baby close, kept the motion going, and waited for the wave to pass. So put it all together. Carrying, shushing, rocking, singing, swaddling, every single one of these solves the exact same underlying problem. Not that something is wrong with the baby, but that the baby has just been ripped suddenly and completely out of the only environment its nervous system has ever known, and no one told it the plan. Modern parents are often told that a crying baby just needs patience, or that letting them cry builds independence. But ancient parents never approached it that way because they never had a room to put the baby in that wasn't already full of people. There was no nursery down the hall. There was no crib in another building. The baby was against a body, hearing a heartbeat, rocking with every step from the first hour of life. It wasn't a parenting technique. It was just what being alive looked like. Somewhere along the way, we built houses with separate rooms and cribs with still silent mattresses, and we called it progress. And now we buy machines that simulate a heartbeat. We buy speakers that play white noise recordings of a womb. We buy swings that rock a baby the way a mother's hips used to, automatically, for free. We spent thousands of years engineering ourselves away from the thing a baby actually needed, and now we're spending money trying to engineer our way back to it.